everybody. I am Kellen Freeman from the Delaware County District Library's Maker Annex, and tonight we're going to be doing a virtual program where we'll be looking at Tinkercad. Tinkercad is a free web app that you can use to create 3D objects that are suited for 3D printing. And tonight we'll go over the basics of what it takes to add shapes, create new ones, and group them in interesting ways. I'm going to note that the stream is on a delay for everything, so if I say something, it may take a few seconds for me to see it and to respond. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and I will respond to them as they come up, but it may be a little delayed. So a little bit about the Maker Annex. We are the makerspace for the Delaware Library. We started last August in the Willis building on East William Street, or West William Street, and we have recently relocated to the main library due to the ongoing COVID closures in order to have access to our equipment while the Willis building is closed to outside users. We have a variety of equipment available for you to use. So this is our equipment room that we have here. There's a laser cutter here. There's a vinyl cutter in the back corner, and then on the side over there we have our 3D printers and sewing machines. We also have a laminator available to use, and hopefully soon we'll be having a heat press that we can open up to public usage, but we are not quite there yet with it. We have 4 3D printers, and these are what they look like. So we have 2 of each of these. The one on the left is a Prusa Mark III, or a Mark IIIS, and the one on the right is a Prusa Mini. And they are both capable of doing basically the same things. The Mark IIIS is a little more advanced on what it can do, but really the only difference in practicality is the area that it takes and that you have available to print is a little smaller on the Mini. Largely what we're going to cover is pretty basic stuff. There's a handout that you can access here by going to bit.ly/annexhandout. That will get you the link. You can download that, print it off if you want. And everything that we do tonight will be recorded and put onto our YouTube channel later, so that if you just want to watch for tonight, you can do that and then pull it up later as a reference when you get started on your own. If you want to join along, you can go to tinkercad.com. It's this one right here, and you can create an account and follow along, but feel free to just watch for tonight. So when you sign into Tinkercad, you're going to be presented with the shapes and creations that you've designed in the past. Here's a catalog of everything that I've done on this account that I've kept, deleted some things along the way, going back 5 years to when I first started using Tinkercad and began learning it, clear up until recently. So what I'm going to do, well, I'll point out that any project that you've started before that you want to keep working on, you can hover over the image and choose Tinker This. That will allow you to edit that design. But for tonight, I'm going to choose Create New Design. And we'll give that a moment to pull up. Okay, so when you open up Tinkercad, you'll be presented with the Workplane. That's the big blue box in the center of the screen. That is where shapes are going to be added to when you add them in. Tinkercad is largely about taking multiple shapes and putting them together to create new shapes. Sometimes you'll be adding them together, sometimes you'll be subtracting them from each other, but largely that's the overall premise, is taking shapes and putting them together to create a new shape. Tinkercad by default adds or starts you off with a grid that's based on millimeters. So each one of these Small squares is 1 millimeter. If you prefer to work in inches, you can click Edit Grid down in the bottom right hand corner of the work plane, and you can choose inches from there. That will reshape your grid to be an 1/8 inches, or 1/8 of an inch. I prefer to work in millimeters when I'm doing 3D design. It's just kind of how my brain works since I'm working with things that generally tend to be smaller, but feel free to work with whatever you're used to. A couple things with how the mouse works. So the left mouse button is going to be used to select objects, and so let me get a couple of those in here real quick. It's being a little slow for me. Okay, so if I click on one of these, it selects it. If I click off of it onto the work plane, it deselects it. I can also click and drag a box over it. Hopefully you can see the dotted red line on there, and that will select everything that you've pulled that box over. Similar to if you're in your file explorer in your computer and you're selecting multiple files at once. The right mouse button is used that if you click and hold, you can rotate around your work plane, give you a better view of things. And the scroll wheel, you can move in and out as well. Getting an error message with my screen, so hopefully everything is coming through all right.
I'm going to turn the lights out on you.
Okay. Hopefully this will be going okay still. Leave a comment in the chat if things are not working and you stop seeing the video. But the middle mouse button can also be used to pan around. So if you click the scroll wheel down, you can move around everything. It'd be a little easier to see. Additionally, in order to look around, you can click and drag with the left mouse button on this cube in the top left corner, and that will allow you to kind of pan around your view as well. So next we're going to look at shapes. So as I said, everything is largely built off of shapes here, and on the right hand side you have a collection of 24 what they call basic shapes. Everything from stars and hearts to spheres and cylinders, and text as well. To add one of these, you can either click on it to select it and click into the work plane, or you can click and drag one in. Either one will work the same. When you want to resize a shape, if you click on it, you see these dots around the edges. The black dots allow you to click and drag to pull it in one direction to change the size of it. The white dots allow you to change it in 2 directions. To change the height of one, there's a single dot at the top of the shape. And that will allow you to change the height of the object. One nice thing with this is the number that pops up allows you to click right on the number, and you can type in a number to make it exactly that height, or size, I should say. And I find that's generally more often the fastest way to get the size that you want, unless you're just kind of playing around to see how things look overall. There are also what are called parameters for each shape. So when you select a shape, there'll be these little this box that pops up here on the screen, and it gives you 2 options: solid and whole, which we'll look at here a little bit more in a moment. But then it will give you some options. So a box has an option for radius, that if you click and drag that, it's going to round the corners off on it. Steps is how smooth those corners are. So fewer steps makes it a lot more sharp, and turning it up will make the object overall smoother. The box also has length, width, and height. I generally tend to ignore these because those aren't really found on other objects, so most of your sizing, I recommend you just use the dots to move around. Not every shape has the same parameters. For instance, the cylinder has sides, which changes how many sides are on the cylinder. The less you have, the more jagged it is. The more you have, the more smooth it is. Bevel is kind of similar to that in that it will cut a 45-degree angle on your shape, and then segments will round that out. So you can kind of get similar things to what the box has, but not every object has the same parameters. In fact, if we look at the round roof, you'll see it has no parameters. It's just what it is. And so it's hard to give an exact definition to what each of them are, knowing that some of them aren't going to work the same way. So largely just go in, see what they do, and if you mess up the shape too badly, you can always hit delete and remove it and start over. I'll point out two things on the basic shapes. The first is with text. When you add that, to change what the text is, you're going to click here on the first parameter where it says text and change to what you want it to say. There's a couple different font options as well you can play with. And the other is with the scribble tool. So when you add that, it's going to bring up a second window where you can draw a shape, and then when you hit done, you now have a shape in what your object was. You can get really creative with it, really clever. There's also I will say an iPad version of this, so if you have an iPad and you can use a stylus, you can get a little bit more fine-tuned control with your scribble than if you just use a mouse. So that's a little bit up to you how you want to handle that. But I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these for us to look at the next thing that we're going to do. The next item is moving a shape around. So when you select an object, you can click and drag to move it around. Again, you'll get these directional lines with numbers, so you can make things exactly the placement that you want it to be. But when you click and drag, you're only going to move along the work plane. In order to raise it up and down, there's this little black arrow above the top of the shape. Clicking that will allow you to change the height of where your object is. The final one is these double-sided arrows. Zoomed in a little bit too much. You'll get these double-sided arrows on 3 sides. Those are for rotating. So if you click on one of those and hold, if you move outside of the circle that pops up, you'll be able to move in exact 1 degree rotations. You have very precise movements with this. If you go inside, you lock to these 22.5, which can be helpful to get to more kind of regular angles. And then if you hold down shift, you lock to 45-degree angles. If you just need to rotate something 90 degrees really quick, that can be a quick way to do it. Boxes are a little hard to use that with because they look the same when you rotate them. But now we're going to do a couple more tools that are up here that allow you to work with shapes. So just to give an example, I'm going to make kind of a flat object and grab a couple other things as well. So here I have 2 objects, a box and a sphere. What I want to do is put a hole in the middle of this box. And to do that, we're going to look at what a hole is. So as I mentioned earlier, every shape has these 2 settings of solid and hole. Solid means if we were to export this right now, we would, and put it on the 3D printer, that object would print. A hole means that it wouldn't. It exists in the design, but it wouldn't print anything because it's invisible. It turns into this little kind of gray ghosty image. You'll notice at the top of the basic shapes there's a box and a cylinder that are already holes, but any shape can become one. Those are just some common ones that they give you at the start, so you can see that those are what they are. So I could try and position this where I think is exact. I could take measurements, and that would all work fine, but what I'm going to do is use the Align tool. So by selecting both of these, I will come up above the shape parameters box to align. When I click that, it gives these black dots around 3 sides. And what this will allow me to do is align all of the selected objects based on that point. So if I click this one here, it's going to align the left side of all the objects together. So they're all starting on the left side. What I'm going to do is click the center on both of these so that I get my cylinder hole lined up in the center of the box. And you'll notice that they turn into gray dots if they're already lined up, so that means I don't have to click them again. So now that I have these here, the hole isn't going to print, but it hasn't become a hole in the box yet. So what we need to do is group objects. With 2 or more objects selected, you can group them together. I will point out if you group 2 solid objects together, they become one solid object in that new shape. If you group a hole and a box together, or a hole and a solid together, it removes the hole from the solid. Now, say you put that there, but it wasn't exactly where you wanted it to be. You can ungroup them and adjust anything that you need to do. Maybe I want this in the top corner instead, and then regroup them. That works for as many groupings as you want. You don't have to group them all individually. You can take, so I've grouped all of these together. I can then group these together once again to form one brand new shape as well. I will point out that when you click on solid, it will give you color options. At the Annex, we only stock one color of filament. It's white because it's easily paintable with acrylic paint. And so it's a quick and easy way for anybody to make their designs whatever colors they want to be without having to make sure that we can keep multiple colors on hand at any given time. But it can be very helpful for you to keep a look at multiple color parts in your design. So if you click on multicolor, it's going to, I have a bad example because everything was already red. If I group these together once again, by keeping the multicolor in, I can see what parts make up the design. So I still have this orange cylinder. This one, if I would go back and ungroup them, would become orange again and everything. It's a nice way to be able to visually see what parts are being made up of, or what your design is made up of. But it is not necessary, and it's not going to come out in a multicolor way when we print it. But it is helpful for design purposes. So I do not see any questions, so we're just going to continue on with some considerations when it comes to your design for 3D printing. So overhangs can be tricky. Because if you think of a 3D printer as a computerized hot glue gun, if I took a hot glue gun and squeezed a line out right here above my desk, it wouldn't just hover in midair, it would fall down. And 3D printers work largely the same way. Here's a short little video you can see of our 3D printer in use. And so you can see it just goes through and adds one layer at a time to the project as it goes. And what that means is if you have overhangs in your design and they're not supported, they're just going to droop and they're going to look bad. What that often means is you'll end up with a design like this cube made up of all of these individual interesting parts, but you're going to have to print a whole bunch more filler material in between to allow it to print correctly, and then remove that afterwards. And it's designed to be removable pretty easily. It does require maybe a little bit of cleanup here and there, but it does add time and cost to the design. So if you can design your projects with certain things in mind, you'll have a better end result. So let's look at a couple of things you can do. Curves are tricky. So if I put this in here and we look at it from the side, if we're looking at each layer of this and slicing it into individual little layers, those bottom layers have a lot of room that they have to go out before there's anything supported under them. And so the bottom layers are going to droop and aren't going to look very good. The top layers are going to come out okay. About anything past this 45-degree angle spot is going to turn out all right. A lot of this advice doesn't really work too great for sculptural models, where the sculptural design tends to become what it is. But if you're like me and you design more mechanical parts, you can plan for this. So one thing you can do is use 45-degree angles instead of curves, where that necessitates. So aside from this very thin sliver at the bottom, this would print fine. Our printers can handle a 45-degree angle. We might need just a little bit of bracing here at the bottom to make sure that it's staying attached to the printer bed while it goes, but otherwise this will keep going. So if you've got a design that has an overhang and you can keep it to about 45-degree angle, that will work fine. Another thing to consider is breaking your design into multiple parts. I don't have the design on my computer, but this is a little gondola car for a Ferris wheel I was designing. If I were to print this as is, it would fill in everything in here with support material. It would look very similar to that cube. And it's going to add hours to my print time, and it's going to be a ton of material that I have to throw away and have spent money on to do so. So what I did was I cut the cap off in my design and printed it in two separate parts so that I could glue it together when it was done. It saved me an hour and a half of print time and an unknown amount of filament, because I didn't print it, so I don't know actually how much it used, but it would have been probably a dollar's worth of material that was saved by not doing it that way. So anytime you can do a design in multiple parts and attach them together later, that will help reduce the cost of your overall project, as well as the time it takes to do so. Another consideration is the size of your object. So we don't leave the printers running while we're not here, and so we do have time limits on projects. Sometimes projects go up in time frame based on the detail that they have. So small figurines or really intricate parts can take more time just by their nature. But also the support material can add into that as well. But largely what we often find is the size of the project is what determines a lot of that. And so if you have it's like a full-size helmet for a costume that you want to do, or a large intricate model of an animal or something, that size requirement is going to come into effect in two ways. One, the amount of time that it takes to print it will be problematic for us. But also, if you go above about 7.5 inches in any direction, it's just going to be too big for our print bed. We won't be able to do it in one piece. Once again, you may be able to cut it into smaller pieces and glue it together later. We had one project earlier this year that was a spaceship from a TV show that was about 12 inches long, more than we can do in any one sitting, and overall took, I think, about 16 hours to print, but we were able to cut it into smaller pieces, and we printed it in about 7 different pieces, with each one taking no more than about 3 hours to do, and they were able to be glued together and painted, and it came out just fine. So if your design can account for that as well, that's great. Another thing to consider, I mentioned fine detail. Once you get down to a certain size, our printers just can't print it. We've come across this in a couple of spots. We've had a couple of small figurines come into play and other designs that look good on the screen but just don't come out very well. Try and come up with an example. So if I was making, say, a keychain that had a lot of text on it, just try and rotate this around a little bit. So if I put this text on top of my keychain, I can't guarantee, but there's a good chance that the line across the X here, these tips, the brace here on the E, probably aren't going to print just because they get too narrow for our printer to be able to put anything in. Generally, if it is smaller than the width of our nozzle head on the printer, it's going to interpret that as not existing. And so if you get too small with certain things, you may not be able to get it to come out. And we'll generally take a look at that and look for any errors like that we see and let you know before we send it to the printer. But if you are designing something that's intentionally small, the smaller the detail, the more likely it is that it's not going to show up. So now that we have looked at how to design a project, we're going to look at how you get it to the library. So to get it to us, you're going to go up here and choose Export. When you do so, you'll be given a few options. The first thing you want to look for is everything in the design. Usually, if you have one part of it selected by accident, you may have this selected shapes pop up, in which case you're only going to be exporting the selected objects. You want to make sure that you're exporting everything in the design, unless you are specifically building a collection of designs in one object and only want one single part of it. There is a case for that, but make sure that you're selecting everything that you want. Then you'll choose STL. We prefer that. It works really well for us. OBJs are doable, but STLs work really well with the printer setups that we have, so we prefer they come in that option. And then you will choose download, which it is now trying to do that. My computer is hiccuping a little bit. And so I will save that object. And it should be done here in just a moment. And from there, you're going to go to the library's website. Oh, there it goes. Just popped up into the bottom corner. And I can get to that. So from the DelawareLibrary.org website, you will go down to about halfway through the page to our locations. You're going to find the Maker Annex here. I click on the Maker Annex page, and that will give you our hours, which once again, due to the building closures at this time, are not available, but announcements will be made soon about that. If you want to learn just more about the Maker Annex, you can click Details. But for now, you can choose Submit a Project. When you do that, you will be taken to our project submission page. Here you can fill out this form. We ask for your name, your library card, your email. We ask for the library card because we put these objects on hold for you, just like any other book, so that you get notified when they're ready to pick up. And we use your library card for that. The email is if we have any questions for you. Especially with the 3D printing, we'll always give you an estimate of how much your project will be before we actually print it. So that way you know how much it's going to be. We charge 5 cents a gram for 3D printing, and our software can give you an estimate, but it's hard to just kind of know how much something's going to weigh by looking at it on the screen. So we can give you that estimate beforehand. You can choose your pickup location. We are currently staffed in the Delaware library, but we will send things to the other branches for you to pick up. I'll note at this exact moment in time, we are on a slower delivery schedule between the branches, so that if you are choosing a location other than Delaware, it may take you a little bit more time to get your project, but we are still sending things to other branches for pickup. And then we'll ask you for what kind of project you're submitting. For this, it'll be a 3D printer. You can leave this as is, unless you know that you want a smaller. So 0.3 layer height is what we print everything on by default. For most cases, it's going to be just fine. If you're doing something small and sculptural, you can go smaller, especially if you have curves or like vertical curves, such as like this lobster. These curves here are going to show more of your layer heights, and so you can go smaller with it. Just know that it will take more time, and it may take more material as well, so that's something to consider. And then you'll attach your file that you want to send in. The notes field is if you have any comments for us. It's not required. Sometimes people will say that they want 2 of them, or they need a certain quantity or something like that. The notes field is just so we can know kind of what we're looking at when we go. Once again, if we have any questions, we'll email you for this. And then you'll hit submit, and then we will respond to you as soon as we can with an estimate and get things going on the printer. So that is everything that I had planned for tonight. If you have any questions at all, feel free to email makerannex@delawarelibrary.org. We'll be happy to answer any questions, and we'll be doing a short video here soon on the YouTube channel that will have more information about what the Annex has to offer and what you can do here, so be sure to look for that, and we hope to see you soon. Once again, if you have any questions, makerannex@delawarelibrary.org. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you soon.